Let's mod the PowKiddy RGB30 in 4 different ways. Or maybe you consider this 3 different ways, because the first mod we're going to do is to install the Ark operating system. Some people in general prefer Ark over Jealous, but it's really preferential in my opinion. Ark does have some really good optimized defaults compared to Jealous, but I think Jealous is a little easier to work with. However, ArkOS is required for one of the later mods, so we'll go ahead and install it here. The second mod will be the long-awaited D-pad fix. This will basically make the D-pad a little more accurate and stop you from hitting all those accidental diagonals. You're going to need some Captain tape for this particular mod. The third mod will be to switch out the existing face buttons with some custom ones, and I'm going to use these beautiful ones from Sakura Retro Modding. There's a link to these in the description box below if you're interested, but this guide will work the same for any custom face button. And finally, we'll be adding vibration or rumble motors to this device. With this setup, supported games like Pokemon Pinball on Game Boy, or any number of Dualshock-enabled PlayStation 1 games, will cause the device to rumble. It's not a particularly difficult mod, but you are going to need a soldering iron and the associated tools. At minimum, you're going to need to solder on 2 wires. But if you want a dual motor setup, you'll probably need to do some splicing as well, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, let's go ahead and jump right in with the ArkOS install. Now you have a couple of options here. If you want to, you can buy a second SD card, and hot swap between ArkOS and Jealous whenever you want, by simply swapping out the left side SD card. Or you can completely overwrite your existing Jealous operating system on your existing SD card. Either way works fine, however note that if you're only using one SD card, meaning you don't have a second SD card for ROMs, you're going to want to back up your ROMs and BIOS and saves before you wipe out the original card. If you do have a secondary SD card that contains your ROMs, then you don't need to do anything. You can actually hot swap between Jealous and ArkOS whenever you want, simply by replacing the left side SD card. The process here is the same regardless of which method you want to use, and it's really easy. First we'll browse to the ArkOS GitHub, and then scroll down the page until we find the download links for the RGB30 specific build. This is going to download an archive file. After extracting that archive, you'll have a .image file, and all we need to do is to write this to either the existing or the new SD card. On Windows, you can use something like Win32 Disk Imager. Just select the correct SD card, then browse to the image file, and then click Write. If you're on Linux or Mac, you can use DD, but I recommend against using Balena Etcher in any case because it does cause some problems. If you're on Windows, you may be prompted to format the SD card after the writing is complete, but absolutely don't do this. Just eject the SD card and reinsert it into your device. Power the device on and wait quite a long time until it goes into the emulation station home screen. This will take anywhere from around 5 to 15 minutes, and your device will reboot several times in the process, so just leave it alone until it's on this home screen. And once you're on the screen, you can go ahead and activate your second SD card for ROMs. Go to the Options section, and then select Advanced. Scroll down to the bottom and you'll find Switch to SD2 for ROMs. Select that option and then wait a few minutes while it processes until you're back on the emulation station menu. And now all of your systems and ROMs will be visible. And that's it for the operating system install. Now we're ready to go ahead and crack the RGB30 open for the rest of the mods. Starting with the D-pad mod. Power off your device and then remove the SD cards. Noting that I forgot to do this originally in my footage. Make sure to remember which SD card is which as well. Something you should definitely do for this entire process, which I didn't do in this footage, is to lay your RGB30 face down on a soft microfiber cloth. Doing so will avoid any damage or scratches to the screen or analog sticks. Anyway, unscrew the 4 Phillips screws on the back, and then use a spudger to gently remove the clips around the edges of the device. This shouldn't be too difficult, and I recommend to go in from the top in the middle first, and then move along to the shoulders and then down the edges and around the bottom of the device. You shouldn't need too much force for this, and eventually the back should just pop off. A good word of advice here is to never use excessive force. It should never take too much to open this device. Once the back clips have been removed, you don't want to pull the case completely off, because there are 5 cables that you don't want to rip. The first thing you want to do is to remove the battery connector. Just wiggle it free from its slot until it comes loose, and try to avoid putting excessive pulling force on the wires themselves. Next, do the same thing to remove the speakers, and then the black antenna cable should just pop right off. Now you can place the back cover aside, somewhere safe and out of the way, especially because the battery is exposed. So here we have the inside of the RGB30, and there are 7 screws here that we need to unscrew that are holding the motherboard down. Just remove these one by one, keeping them separate from the 4 other screws we removed earlier. because you definitely don't want to screw the wrong screw into the wrong place when we put it back together. Now release the clips for the analog sticks and gently pull the ribbon cables out. Then release the clip for the display cable in the middle and gently move that out as well. I recommend against using any kind of metal tool to handle these ribbon cables because you risk ripping or piercing them, so just be careful. If you can use your fingers, that's best. Then you should just be able to gently lift the motherboard away from the case. If you know, I actually forgot to remove the display cable until this point. And another word of advice here is that if something feels like it's pulling or keeping the board down, you've probably forgot a screw or a cable somewhere, so just double check. Again, excessive force is never needed. Turn it over and we'll take a look at the D-pad contact. As you can see, I've actually already had this mod installed, which is this yellow tape in the center. It's simply a square of Captain tape covering the bottom halves of the contact. With this mod, it lessens accidental diagonals and makes the D-pad a little bit more accurate when you roll it around. It also doesn't change the overall feeling of the D-pad either. Now my installation here does work pretty great, except that the up direction is a little stiff. So we'll go ahead and redo this together now. After measuring the distances between the contacts, I found that I would need around a 16mm square piece of tape. My original install was 16.5 square, but I recommend going with 16, it seems to be a bit better. And since I did this mod again, it's been perfect for me. If you find narrow Captain tape, you can use 2 pieces of it in a cross shape, or if you have wide tape like mine, you'll want to cut it into a square. By the way, this really doesn't have to be completely perfect to substantially improve the D-pad, so don't stress about it too much. I cut a piece of tape and set it stupidly on my heatproof soldering mat, then I squared off the edge, measured 16mm and cut down the tape. Then I turned it 90 degrees, measured 16mm again, and cut it again, right through the mat. Oh well. I then used tweezers to remove the cut square of tape, because this is really thin and hard to detach. Also, you want to handle the sticky side of the tape as little as possible, because it does lose stickiness fast with your hand oils. And now what we need to do is to stick this tape as close to the center as possible. Make sure to get a fairly precise fit, with the tape evenly covering the bottoms of each of the pads. Upon reviewing my footage here, I have no idea why I thought my installation was good. It's super uneven on the top and on the bottom. But since I've done this, it has worked great, so I guess you don't need to be perfectly accurate. You might want to try this multiple times. However, to actually test this, you need to reassemble the entire device. Either way, if you're removing the tape multiple times and using metal tweezers, be very careful not to scrape the motherboard. So that's the D-pad mod done. But I do have a couple of notes for you here. What you should actually do is to cut the corners off of your Captain tape. And that's because the corners are generally the first area that would peel up. It usually doesn't happen with Captain tape though, it sticks down very securely. My second note is that you can technically use electrical tape for this mod as well. However, due to the thickness and the rubbery material, it is going to change how the D-pad itself feels. Also, electrical tape has a tendency to shrink and peel over time, so Captain tape is definitely my recommendation. And finally, if this seems too hard to shape and cut yourself, you can buy pre-made cuts on Etsy. Personally, I don't think that's really worth it for just a few minutes of patience, but you can order one if you want. I'll leave a link to an Etsy shop in the description box below if you want to do that. And so if you were just here for the D-pad mod, you can now go ahead and reassemble your device. But I have a couple more mods to do here, starting with the modded face buttons. I have these gorgeous, fantastic Sakura retro modding PlayStation buttons, and these are so much better than stock, it's kind of ridiculous. Not only do they look fantastic, but they also have a dome shape, which makes it much easier to slide your fingers between the different buttons. They're so comfortable and just amazing, I love them. I'll leave a link to these in the description box below, and note I did purchase these with my own money and this video isn't sponsored or anything. Anyway, installing these is super easy. Grab the front shell of the device, pull off the right side membrane, and then pop out the old buttons. Then you just need to pop the new ones in. Depending on the types of buttons you get, you might need to ensure that they're in the right way, especially the triangle button in this case. Once you have them all installed, reseat the membrane, pushing it over the 4 pillars. Then hold your finger on the center of the membrane and lift the device. Whilst holding the membrane, push the buttons in gently to make sure that they're not getting stuck or aren't too stiff. When I did this, the square button was kinda stiff, so I took it out, accidentally dropped it, and put it back in, and then it was fine. Note that you won't be able to fully know what these are going to feel like until you've screwed the motherboard back down, so you might want to do that just to check the buttons. And if this is all you're doing, you can now reassemble your device. But I'm personally going to go for the big mod, adding the vibration or rumble motors. I want to say a big thanks to my friend Gameboy Juntado for showing me this mod. and the ArkOS developers for fully documenting it on their wiki, which you should definitely check out. So here's what you're going to need for this mod. First, the motors. You'll need to get some 10 by 3.4mm size, 1.5 volt to 3 volt DC coin button type motors. I bought a pack of 5 of these on Amazon for $4.99. I'll leave a link in the description box below for UK and US viewers in case you want to buy some. You'll then of course need a soldering iron and the associated equipment, such as solder, flux, alcohol or PCB cleaner, a set of helping hands, etc. Optionally, if you want to install both motors, you'll need some additional wire and wire strippers. Some straight cutters are recommended as well. On the back side of the board, you'll see a big white circle, and just above that you'll see 2 pads marked with Moto. These are the connections for the motor, and the white circle is where the motor itself goes. And we're going to start by just adding one motor. According to the ArkOS wiki, it's a good idea to test your motors with a battery first, but I didn't bother. The blue or black wire from the motor itself should go on the bottom pad, which is closest to the white circle, and the red wire will go on the upper pad. I'm going to start by adding some additional solder to the pads. I'm adding a little bit of flux, which helps the solder to flow, and gives you a nice clean soldering job. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of solder to the pads to make some bigger blobs. Next, I'll tin the wires of the motor. For this, I'm just using a set of helping hands to hold the wires, and then I'm coating the exposed wire with just a tiny bit of solder. It will melt directly into the wire and will help us get a better connection. We do need to do this quickly because the shielding on the motor's wires will melt pretty quick. Now I'm just going to solder those wires onto the pads. Now I'm not great at soldering, but I do this by just heating the pad first, then melting the wire into the existing solder. It's easiest to do the blue wire first and then the red wire. And yeah, that's pretty easy overall. And by adding those bigger blobs first, we get a nice solid connection. Once these are soldered on, try not to move the motor around too much, or you risk breaking the wires or ripping the pads off of the board. These motors come with adhesive pre-installed, so I'm going to pull off the white cover using my tweezers, and then stick it down toward the center of that white circle. And that's actually it for this mod. The rumble motor should now work perfectly. And at this point, if you only want to use one motor, which is itself an excellent solution, you just need to clean up the remaining flux with some isopropyl alcohol or PCB cleaner, and then reassemble your device. There's a timestamp for enabling the rumble in ArkOS for you to skip to if you want to do that. However, let's go ahead and add the second motor for double the fun. For this, we'll need to extend the motor wires. I'll start by cutting some lengths longer than necessary, then stripping the ends and tinning them. Now we need to solder these wires to the second rumble motor to extend them. And yeah, I'm so sorry for this complete botch job. I held the wires together, twisting them as much as I could together, and then just did what I had to do to solder them. Give me a like, a comment, and a subscribe if this is the worst wire splicing job you've ever seen. But it did actually work, so whatever. Now we need to shield the wire. I'm using some heat shrink, but you could just wrap it in electrical tape if that's easier for you. We want to stick the motor into the empty space on the other side of the board. However, note that I didn't stick the motor down just yet because I don't want to put any unnecessary tension on the wires. Now I'm going to roughly cut the wires to length based on that position. It's okay for them to be a little bit longer than needed. Next, I'll strip the wires and tin them. And my advice here is to strip a lot, tin a lot, and then clip them down to a small length using clippers. Then we'll just solder them into the same pads as before with the other wires. And that's it. We just need to stick the motor down, and then stick the wires down with a little Captain tape and we're done. To be honest, when I was recording this, I was in a real hurry, so my tape was rushed. We just don't want the wires to be moving around too much inside. I also forgot to clean the excess flux off of the pads, which is something you definitely want to do. This stuff will very slowly but very surely eat through your PCB, so I had to take mine apart again and clean it, but I didn't record that. So that's 4 mods complete. Let's go ahead and reassemble the device. Reinsert the volume, power, and reset buttons, then lower the motherboard down toward the case, ensuring that the display cable goes through its slot, and that the analog stick cables are up above the motherboard. Then just gently lay the motherboard down into place. Check the ports to ensure that the board is seated correctly, then reconnect the analog sticks and the display cable. Screw the board back down, reinsert the shoulder buttons, but ensure that they're the right way round. I got mine wrong, so I had to redo them. With the back cover, reconnect the antenna, then the speakers, and finally the battery. Always do the battery last. Push the cover back on, but don't put on those 4 screws just yet. First we want to power the device on and make sure there aren't any issues. Initially, my device turned on but nothing came up on the screen. I took it apart and reseated the display cable, but it still didn't work. After quite a long time troubleshooting, I realized I had forgotten to put the SD cards back in. Anyway, with the SD cards reinserted, the operating system booted right up, and everything seems to be working fine. If you didn't install the rumble motors, you can go ahead and screw the back 4 screws in and you're done. But if you did, we can enable rumble in the operating system. To enable it, press start and go to advanced settings, and then go to the bottom and enable optional rumble motor. I'm going to test this in Pokemon Pinball to begin with, and it works absolutely great. The rumble is pretty subtle and it feels fantastic and adds a great tactile feeling to this game. And I can confirm that it did come through on both sides thanks to the dual motor setup. For PS1, we need to change some further settings. When you're in-game, open the RetroArch menu, then go to Controls, Device Type, and set it to DualShock. In Core Options, Input, ensure that Rumble is enabled. And then in your particular game, you might need to go into the Options setting and enable Vibration. Once you've verified the Rumble is working, you can save the core overrides to make sure that those settings apply to all games. However, bear in mind that you may need to enable it in each individual game's options menu. And that's it. 4 incredible mods, okay fine, maybe 3 incredible mods for your PowKiddy RGB30. I honestly can't believe that this device just keeps getting better and better and better. I adored it out of the box, but the improved D-pad, the better face buttons, and the vibration motor just take it to a whole new level. If you perform any of these mods, let me know how it goes in the comment box below, and be sure to let me know if you have any questions about it as well. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and leave a like on it, subscribe to RetroBreeze for more content just like this, and share on your social media channels as well. And I think that's about this one done. So thank you very much for watching RetroBreeze, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.